Hi, everybody. Ruth here with episode number 102 of the Coach's Journey podcast. And for this episode, I am really excited to share with you my interview with Ellie Scarf. Now, I found Ellie Scarf, I found her podcast actually a few months ago. And since then, I've been avidly consuming her content because I find it super practical and really tangible and helpful. So hopefully you will get loads out of this interview as well. Ellie has a program called the Corporate to Coach Accelerator, in which she supports both new coaches and established coaches. She's also a CEO of Lucent Global Coaching Consultancy, which supports leaders and companies through significant periods of transition. And as I mentioned earlier, she's also the host of her own podcast, which is called The Business of Executive Coaching, where I think she's just as inspiring as a host as she is a guest on our podcast today. It was an absolute pleasure to chat with Ellie. She's so down to earth, practical and generous with her advice, as well as clearly being super knowledgeable in the field of coaching. We chat about all sorts, those annoying programs, get-rich-quick programs that we're sold to as coaches. We talk about that and how they prey on our fears. We also discuss directive coaching versus non-directive, especially when there is a knowledge gap, and many, many other things. So I shall stop whittering on and introduce to you episode 102 with Ellie Scarf. Good afternoon, Ellie Scarf, and welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast. I paused then because it's afternoon for you and morning for me.
It is, but I consider myself to be a citizen of the world, so I really relate to all time zones. So I'm okay with good morning, good afternoon, good evening, you name it. I'm with you.
Brilliant. Well, that's amazing, and obviously that's because listeners may have detected an accent that you're in Australia.
I am. I'm in Western Australia, the land of very beautiful white beaches and quokkas, you know, the ones that Roger Federer likes to take those photos, selfies with quokkas, the cute little kangaroo things.
Oh, wow. I've never heard of quokkas.
I feel like that story really didn't land then, did it?
Well, it might have landed with everyone else. They might all be going, I love quokkas.
Yes, I hope so. But it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome, Ellie. And it's especially exciting for me because you're actually my first international guest.
Oh,
and I'm doing it in style with you in Western Australia, I think, aren't I?
No, very international.
Very, very international. Yeah, well, I'm really, really excited and pleased to have you here and be able to have a chat with you because I've been following your work for some time. And I've found it so useful and so practical. So I think you're going to have loads of fantastic and interesting things to say for our listeners.
No pressure. No pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, no pressure. Sorry about that. So yeah, thank you so much for coming.
No problem. Great to be here.
Let's dive straight in with, it's usually the question that we always start the podcast with. Always start the podcast with, and that's, when did you first come across coaching as you know it now?
This is such a good question, and I actually had to think back a little bit about this, and because the truth is I feel like coaching has been part of my identity for so long that it's hard to think about when I first heard about it. But it certainly wasn't until I was probably in the sort of the second chapter of my professional life, if you like. So I started as a lawyer And, there was no coaching. This is the very early 2000s. There was no one was talking about coaching at the time. The professional development, I remember vividly having a training session where they taught us how to network, and the guts of it was, how can you shake hands and still hold an hors d'oeuvre and a champagne glass all at once? And, that was what was considered important for a baby lawyer to know.
Okay. So how can you do that?
Well, the answer was don't eat, because clearly they weren't expecting you to not drink. So you had to prioritize.
Okay, yeah. I think I'd go with champagne over hors d'oeuvres.
That's right. That was the assumption that for lawyers in these, top tier law firms, that's what we would be doing.
Okay.
Yeah. So didn't really hear about it until the second phase of my career, which is when I'd left law. I'd gone to recruit lawyers for a while, very unsuccessfully, mind you. And then I came back into the world of law firms, more into running graduate programs and in learning and development, which was much more my speed. And as I started getting into, and I wouldn't say that back then law firms were very, I guess, at the cutting edge of learning and development. They weren't at the time. So there wasn't a lot of talk of coaching. But I started to come across colleagues who were studying coaching. And I met a friend, and this was a new friend because I'd moved to Sydney, and this was a running friend. So we used to go running together, and she started telling me that she was at Sydney University doing her Masters of Coaching Psychology. Oh. And I was like, what's that? Because at the time, and it's really weird that I hadn't heard of coaching before this, but I was studying psychotherapy, actually. So I was just studying transactional analysis. I thought that maybe that was my path. But I was speaking to Louise, who is a good friend still and a mentor and has been for, over 20 years now. And I was sort of like, tell me about this. And she's like, I think you should, you'd be interested in this. And then suddenly it came into my world in so many ways. So I had a colleague who, it turns out, that was the coaching course she was also doing. I started finding books about coaching when I'd walk into the bookshop. So it was like the universe was saying, yes, here we go. Here we go. It's time now for you to explore this new path. And I'm not really a very woo-woo hippie kind of person, but I do think there was a sense of, it was the right time. It was meant to be. And of course I was just paying more attention to it, but that's how it felt.
Yeah. I love that. What year was that then?
I want to say 2004.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think that was 2004, and I started, so I made the leap then very quickly to jump on board the Sydney Uni Coaching Psychology Masters program, and I think I started there in 2005 or 6.
Wow, okay.
So that was sort of one of the first years that program had been offered. It was I think it was the first university coaching masters program.
Especially with that combination with psychology, that's quite forward thinking kind of for that time, I think.
It really was, and we were taught by Tony Grant, who was quite a trailblazer of coaching psychology, and particularly evidence-based coaching. So he and Susie Green, who particularly, is evidence-based coaching and positive psychology, who I've gone on to work with a lot, and all of the faculty there were really amazing. And, when you look through the British Psychological Journal, for example, you see all of these names, repeatedly across there. So felt really, really like I was part of a movement as well as a learning experience. So it was incredible and definitely shaped, my approach to coaching in a very, integral way. And of course, I think we're all shaped by those first training experiences that we have as coaches, because I don't think that there is anything like that ramp up we have when we not just learn about coaching, but we learn to be a coach. Because there's these two tracks that are happening at once, right? We're learning these skills and processes, but we're having this deeply transformational experience ourselves. Yeah. And that's, the best coaching training. That's what I've observed be involved.
Yeah. I'm like beaming because I totally agree.
Yeah.
And Yeah, it's like you just get obsessed, don't you?
You do. Yeah, you do. And, like I do feel like I think I mentioned I'd been training in psychotherapy in sort of this in transactional analysis, which was a particular modality of psychotherapy. And, I'd had therapy myself as a young person going through, various mental health challenges. And, I never quite got my head around the fact that psychotherapy was the right fit for me. I enjoyed the learning and I enjoyed the personal exploration. But when I found coaching, it just put another jigsaw piece together in this puzzle, because what I really love is the organizational context. So I'm very much executive coaching. That's my jam. That's my bag. And I think it is because so much of my story was in organizations, and overlaying coaching there with a psychodynamic approach, of course, that I've learned from my therapeutic background. Like, those pieces of the puzzle really were that's how I identify as a coach. Like, that's where I bring value. That's where I feel passionate as a coach. And so, all of the journey led to that point.
Brilliant. There's so many things going off in my head of like places I want to pick up. So you mentioned Tony Grant and Susie Green.
Yes.
Tell me a bit more about them, just because I've not heard those names before.
So Tony Grant, I particularly want to just recognise him. Tony passed away, I think, just before COVID. He was an extraordinary researcher, and very highly published. Like, I could probably pull out in one reach of my arm at least one book, and I can see another 3 of his books on the shelf. And he was all about, I think, in his books particularly, sort of practical applications for leaders of coaching psychology and evidence-based coaching. And so when he was teaching us, he the evidence base for coaching was emerging, and so he was part of creating that evidence base from the ground up. And he was a really vibrant lecturer. He was hilarious. Sometimes you heard his jokes a few too many times, but he was extraordinary, and he really did help generations of coaches through this program to discover this really meaningful passion for coaching, right? It was not just a, coach by numbers program. It was a, what is this experience? What is the impact of it, and how do we do it in an evidence-based way? So he's extraordinary. If you look up Anthony Grant, you will find numerous articles that he's written, co-authored, amazing, mostly about the impact of evidence-based coaching, right? So coaching impact. Susie Green is another both role model and mentor of mine. She has her own podcast, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So check her out. She runs the Positivity Institute. So she is very much a pioneer of both positive education and positive psychology in a leadership context. So she is very heavily published. And while she focused for a long time in education, was where she was really well known, she is very much now known across the organizational space. I've had the fortune to work as part of her team over the years and partner with her on various engagements, but she's extraordinary. And you see her often presenting at conferences. She's quite extraordinary.
Brilliant. I'm going to go down those 2 rabbit holes.
Oh, absolutely. So Susie's book, if you're looking it up, is called The Positivity Prescription. I highly recommend it. It brings in all the evidence base from, positive organizational scholarship, coaching psychology, and really merges them into a set of very practical tools that you can use both individually but also in organization.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a cracker.
Looking that up. Yeah, thank you.
I love book recommendations.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So it's interesting because I've noticed, like, when I've listened to your podcast, that you talk about evidence-based coaching a lot. So, let's chat a bit more about that. Like, how do you define that?
Yeah.
And how does that come into your work?
Yeah, so for me, evidence-based coaching is coaching with a toolkit and a set of perspectives that we bring to our coachees that emerges from the research base, either of psychology, coaching in some cases, although that is emerging, but also social sciences, business psychology, from those areas. But they are tools that are not, not just things that someone created and just decided, I think this seems like a good approach for coaching. So they are things that are empirically validated in some way. And so, we've been taught those. I've been taught those, and I've learnt those in many different ways. But it always comes back to, asking the question about, where does this approach come from? Like, have I, is it validated? How do I know that it's validated? Because I think we have that responsibility to our coachees, to our clients, to ensure that the tools we bring to them are not, are going to help. And are going to support them. Now, I think over the years, I've probably come to be a little gentler in my application of that theory, because I do think that in many cases, and this is probably using another evidence-based theory, like, ego development theories, adult development theories, the work of, Suzanne Cook-Greuter or Keegan or Torbett, which says to us that people are going through their own predictable developmental journey. And as coaches, we will best serve them by meeting them where they're at. And so when we meet them where they're at, that looks very different. So some are, very achievement oriented, and it means that, things like our GROW model is going to land well, our models of change, our trans-theoretical model of change, that's all going to play really well. House of change, all of these things will work very well. But we might also have coachees that are not in that place, right? That are more in an earlier stage of their development, and what they need might look different to what they might need later on. And so that might mean that we use more of a teaching style, which is super controversial for a lot of coaches, right, to talk about. But if we're meeting people where they're at, then in fact, it's not about us forcing our models and our approaches in a particular way. It is actually genuinely about what is needed. And, even in some cases, we're sort of, recreating experiences that this person's had with authority figures, right? We're playing a psychodynamic role. We're doing a lot of different things. So that was a very long-winded way of me saying that evidence-based approaches are really multitudinous, but I think it comes down to, if I were to summarize it, being very intentional about the tools and the perspectives we bring to our coachees, and knowing where they're from, and knowing that we, are choosing them for a reason in the context we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And I would say on that basis, like my go-to expert in this is my mentor, Louise Kovacs. So she is also extensively published in the area of complexity in coaching. She has a book coming out shortly, which is all about not case conceptualization particularly, but how do you understand your coachees? How do you frame your approach to your coachees? And how do you use these perspectives and these tools in a very deliberate way with your coachees? So she's almost teaching that gap between, here's the evidence base of coaching, and, well, how do I use that with a coachee? So watch this space. That's coming soon. She's amazing.
Okay, so that's Louise Kovacs.
Yes, yeah. So you'll see a lot of her work in the British Psychological Journal, for example, and beyond. But you can send me, or you can find her on LinkedIn. She's on LinkedIn.
Oh yeah, brilliant. So there's also, though, something that came to my mind when you were talking regarding evidence-based coaching, that a lot of the time, or some of the time, I don't know what you think, you can't always quantify the impact of coaching.
That's exactly right. And so when I think of evidence-based coaching, the evidence is gathered in lots of different ways, right? So there is case study based evidence. There is, the gold standard, double-blind controlled trials. There's and then there's multitudinous ways that evidence is gathered. And so it's not just the linear well, this person got coached and then they sold 10 more widgets, right? So I think you're right. We need to consider the evidence base very broadly, and not be too narrow about that.
Yeah. And also, obviously, you kind of dipped into the age-old directive and non-directive coaching, which I'm really fascinated in, really.
Me too.
Because like you said, sometimes there needs to be direction.
Yeah, and sometimes there is a knowledge gap, right? And the knowledge gap is, in some ways we can encourage the filling of that knowledge gap by self-directed activities, but sometimes we do need to do some telling. And I say that and I'm like, oh my God, the coaches are going to come for me. The ICF is going to knock down my door.
The ICF.
But I actually think it's a bit of a situation where you need to learn the rules so that you can break them.
That's what I was taught on my coach training.
Yeah, and that we need to apply the rules pretty strictly for quite a while before we can have the nuance to know, well, in this case, I think it is in service of my coachee to provide some information or to make a suggestion. So, yes.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that, really. So, my brain's going off in loads of different directions, but I think what I'm going to go to now is, so you said that you pretty quickly joined the coaching psychology masters at Sydney. So then what happened and how did you move into running your own business as a coach?
I'm never sure whether this is a good story or not, but I'll tell it anyway because I'm very open about it. So I started the coaching psychology masters, and within, I would say, 6 months, I had quit my job to work as a coach. And that happened for a couple of reasons. One was I had an opportunity. So Louise, who was my mentor at the time, she was moving into a role, and there was a client that needed some support, and so I was able to step into that role. So there was some work to be done, and I was always very grateful for that. That was sort of my first client was a referral. It was, like running a year-long graduate program accompanied by a lot of one-on-one coaching. It was an incredible opportunity. But I wouldn't have done that if things were going perfectly in the role I was in, right? So I was also in a role that didn't feel like a good fit for me anymore. Like it felt like my strengths were not what was needed of me in that role. I think that role, learning and development in law firms requires someone who's very good at tracking the professional development that the lawyers are doing. And I hate admin, right? I am not very good at it. And so, it was not a good fit. I was getting to do some stuff that I really loved, like running. At the time, I'd learnt Myers-Briggs. I got certified as a Myers-Briggs consultant. This was, a long time ago. And so, I got to run these team development workshops with people, and that, that really fed into what I did love to do. But much of what I was doing didn't, and I don't think I was doing it particularly well. So I think it was probably a good decision for everyone for me to leave. But I very quickly started this business. And to be honest, I did it without much of a support system. I didn't have a backup plan. And I look back on it and I kind of am slightly horrified at the lack of planning that went into that decision. Because when I talk to coaches now, and we'll talk about what I do now with coaches, helping them to build businesses, this is probably the first example of me learning things the hard way, was the way I chose to do it. And I made it harder for myself by not having, a runway, by not having financial buffers, really, just taking a leap. So I made that leap before I think I was maybe a year into the coaching psych masters. And I do want to admit, I never finished the coaching psych masters. So
Oh, really?
and the reason for this is that I was doing it part-time because I was working, and I after running my business for I think 2 or 3 years, I was offered a role in a big global tech adjacent organization, we'll call it, the sort of tech hardware and software. And that role was in organization development, which was pretty exciting. And then I became the national sales coach for that organization across Australia. So all I was doing was coaching the sales leaders, coaching the state leaders, and being in charge of sort of sales strategy and sales capability development. So it was a huge job. It was an amazing job. I learned more about coaching than I ever have in that role, just because of the volume. But what it meant was that I couldn't, this was long pre-COVID. There was no virtual lectures, and I had to travel around Australia. I was traveling every week, and they had an 80% attendance requirement, rightly so, because it was coaching. And so I missed the very last 2 units. So I never finished. And, a lot of people say to me, "Oh my God, you didn't finish it. Like, go and do it." And I just realized it just didn't matter to me as much, because I am a person, like I got the learning that I needed. And the ones that were left were, I think there was a couple of electives. And at the time it was sort of about, using tools in assessment tools in selection and something else. And I was like, I can be okay with this. I can be okay without having the letters after my name, because I've had this experience of the learning.
So it doesn't take away that learning, does it?
No. So absolutely not. But I do recognize it's probably the same people are horrified that I used to be a lawyer and I stepped away from being a lawyer after doing 6 years of law school. Those are also the people that are horrified that I didn't finish my master's.
Those people.
Yeah, but I've come to be okay with it. So it was the right decision for me. But I'm not sure where I was at, but I think I was telling you, yes. So I started my business. I stepped into an organizational role in coaching for a while after that. And so that was my start.
Okay. So you said that you got offered that initial work from Louise. Is that Louise Kovacs?
That is Louise Kovacs, the very wonderful Louise.
And was she teaching on the masters?
She was not. No, she was a student. So she was a student like maybe 3 years before me in that program.
Okay. So how did you meet Louise?
Through our running club, actually.
Oh, right. So, okay, this is your running friend.
Yeah, this is my running friend who was studying coaching and, introduced me to the world, opened my eyes up in so many ways.
So then she referred you with this, was it on a graduate program?
It was to run a graduate program for Meat and Livestock Australia of all people. So it was not a glamorous
I was going to say sounds
first
glamorous
role, but there was the support they were offering to their very young managers was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And these people.
And then you went. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, no, I was going to say, the program was, we came together maybe 2 or 3 times a year in person for all of Australia, and they had individual coaching sessions. And that meant I would travel to some farms, some abattoirs actually.
Nice.
That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and how amazing that they were doing that and offering that to these people. I say all those years ago, making us sound old, but
I know. I do feel a little bit that way when I look at it. I'm like, yeah, that was a while ago.
So, and then you went into the tech adjacent company. Yeah. And then what happened?
So I was at this organisation. I think I can say it. It was at Xerox. So Xerox. So big global organisation. They were $1 billion company in Australia at the time, and I had some incredible experiences. So the national sales coach for the bulk of my time, and I moved towards the end of my time. I moved into innovation commercialisation because we were looking at human-centred approaches to design, and my skill set sat well with that alongside the tech people. But, you know, it's a fairly common experience that a lot of women have, which is that I went on parental leave and moved back to Perth on the basis that that was fine to do my role from Perth. My manager left in the interval, and then I was told, no, you have to move back to Sydney if you want to keep your job. And so, you know, then I was at a bit of a tipping point again. So I had a baby, a 1-year-old. And I was making, you know, it was very clear to me that the choice was, no, now's the time to lean into business again. Because, you know, I sort of knew that I had the capacity, I had the network to do that. And now was the time to do it. And again, you know, I, at that point, started working with Louise again. So, you know, as an associate and then as a business partner, she was based out of Singapore at the time. And so, you know, we built something, or she built something, and then after she left that business, I continued to run that business and many years after that.
And what was that business?
So that was a pure coaching and leadership business. And it's sort of, I had 2 different business partners that over that time. But we had a team of about 20 coaches who worked on the work that we delivered to our clients. So it was very much corporate, you know, global businesses with a presence in Asia. And we worked on all things leadership. So a lot of bespoke programming around leadership development, all things coaching, you know, you name it, leadership team work, some training in adjacent areas, but very, very like a boutique leadership coaching company, really.
And then?
Well, and then so that took us through, you know, sort of 12, 15 years through to COVID, really.
Okay.
And so COVID hit, and it was, so by this time so I'm going to name drop another brilliant coach. My business partner at the time is a woman named Saba Hassani, and she is a brilliant researcher as well, Dr. Saba Hassani and Dr. Louise Kovacs. So I should not leave off their doctorates. So you can tell I do associate with very smart people. I have no desire to do a doctorate myself. But Saba, the focus of her research is really on how the stories from our childhood impact how we show up as leaders and in organisations. And so the process of biographical inquiry and how we incorporate that into our coaching, and the learnings we have from that. So it's very, you know, associated with adult development theories, as well as this process. And so do look her up. She is extraordinary.
What's Saba?
Saba Hassani.
SABA.
SABA.
BA.
HASANIE. So I recommend everyone looks her up and grabs her on LinkedIn. She does run training programs for people in how to apply, you know, this method of biographical inquiry into your coaching process.
That sounds fascinating.
It is hugely fascinating. Anyway, so we were very busy, our business going really well into COVID. And then COVID hit, and we probably saw about a 25-30% hit to revenues in that first year. But what we found in 2021 was that the bounce back was extraordinary. So we had huge, you know, like into the 7 figures, very big business year. You know, we had a lot of coaches on our team at that point. There was a lot of work. It was both amazing, but as anyone who was coaching through that period knows, coaching was pretty heavy. Like there was a lot of, it was a heavy emotional time, and particularly working with a lot of expats through Asia. You know, it was a hard time to be an expat. When you couldn't go home, there was a lot of that.
Yeah.
I also, in 2021, lost my father to suicide. And, you know, I've talked about that a little bit on my podcast, but overall the impact of that on me was really a bit of burnout, to be honest. Like we were very much like a heavy delivery, heavy emotional load, a lot going on personally. And at that point, you know, sort of I had been coaching for, you know, 15 years, and, starting to think about, well, what is the next iteration of my professional life? What does it look like? And for me, what I wanted to do was build something that was really scalable, and something that could help me to impact even more people. And I worked through a few different versions of what that could look like, right? And some of, I won't go into it, but I tried out a few, then they didn't work, right? Okay. I tried out a few models and it didn't work. But what I kept coming back to was that over, probably the 10 years before that, I had loved helping new coaches figure out, like, what does business look like, right? How do you go from your coach training to being in business? And so what I'd done over the years was just casually mentor anyone, who came into my orbit. I had created this very detailed document that had, all of my tips, the ideas, the things you need to do, the must-dos. And I sort of didn't really think too much about it. But when I was talking to some business coaches, actually, people to give me advice on how I might take, my next leap, they asked the question about why I wasn't working with coaches. And it was like everything just landed in place for me. I was like, oh, that's really so obvious as to be almost stupid that I missed it, to be honest. But I realized, I love working with coaches. I love coaching business. And so that's when it was probably, by the time I got to this, it was probably the start of end of 2023, mid 2023, early 2020. I can't exactly remember. And so I decided to build something that could support coaches who were starting or growing businesses, particularly who wanted to work with corporate clients, because that's where I'd always had a lot of success. It was what I knew, and it was where I knew I could help people. And so, and really that's what I have been doing since. And it has been such a joyful transition for me, because, as you know, coaches are really excellent. Coaches are great people. There's no self-interest in that at all. Coaches are great people, and I get to work with them every day. And so, I really love that opportunity. And also, I know that I'm helping, because for us as coaches, and I include myself in this, selling and business development is not natural in many cases. Like, it doesn't align with our view of ourselves and our view of the world a lot of times. And so there's a lot of work to be done, not just on the mechanics of building a business, because, I can give you all the tools in the world, but also on the mindset of what does it mean to be someone who sells myself, right? Yeah. Who has to promote myself, who has to be visible. Who has to be a business owner, not just a coach, right? So those two things need to be held equally. If we want to grow this, and if we want to have the impact we want to have, then we have to be willing to do that work.
Yeah, because here, like at the coach's journey, that's, we say that we don't want anyone to quit coaching because the business of coaching is too hard.
Exactly.
Because when that happens, that's one less coach making important differences.
Yeah. And I want the people who are not necessarily the people who are naturally that way inclined. I want to make sure that, they are also in this story, right? In the picture, because our organizations need those people. They don't just need the people who are, really comfortably extroverted and salesy and maybe come out of those environments. We also need the people who it doesn't come naturally for, because of all of the different strengths that they bring and the different backgrounds they bring. We need these people in our organizations if we want to make the world a better place.
Yeah, for sure. So, again, there's loads of things there. That
I know, there's so much in there.
But I think, if it's okay, like, what really hit me was obviously what you said about your dad.
Yes.
And I know that when life is hard and difficult, you've got other big personal stuff going on.
Yeah.
that for me, that is a really difficult time to be creating new clients and developing a business. So I just wanted to ask you, like, how you weathered that.
Yeah. Do you know, it's such a good point. And so when that happened, it was 2021, and I was in the thick of probably one of the busiest seasons I'd ever been in from a work perspective. So, you know, we had a lot of program design and delivery obligations. I had a heavy, like, one-on-one client load, and I wasn't really sure when it happened. I mean, of course, when it immediately happened, I just cleared the decks for a week, right? You know, and then I was like, well, what do I do now? And I was very much afraid and conscious of, so leaving the grief aside, although you can't really leave aside because it's sort of just part of who you are now. You know, we don't get a choice about that. But I wasn't sure whether I would be able to show up for my clients in the same way, right? Because there's this experience, and I was like, am I going to go there and, like, really not be concerned about their problems? Because I thought they were a bit, you know, like,
listen to what I've got going on.
I'll show you a problem. And like, I really was concerned about that. And of course, so, you know, Saba and my team were incredible. They took things off my plate. You know, that was all very smooth. But the big concern for me was, you know, was I going to have some sort of empathetic deficit as a result of this, because I just didn't have the capacity to be there for someone else's feelings. And I don't even mean this like in the acute period of, you know, the immediate period of time. I sort of meant, you know, like even more ongoing, like, you know, a month, 2 months, 3 months down the track, when the immediacy of it is over, but the lingering, you know, there's no, I don't think you get over these things. We integrate them, right? We integrate them into, you know, who we are and how we see the world. And so that was my concern. But in fact, I think it made me a better coach, you know, to be honest, because what I found was I have never seen myself as someone who's able to compartmentalize. But what I discovered was that I don't compartmentalize, but I am able to be very present with the person in front of me. And so if it had been if I had to do a task, right, I think things like designing workshops, like that would have been, that was very hard for me, because that was like a quality of attention and, you know, that was harder. But I've always found it easy to show up for people. And so that came through very clearly. And I made a strategic decision that I was going to be fairly transparent about what had happened with some of my clients. And because no one gets out of this world without, you know, these sorts of experiences, right? We all have our stories, our scars, that we work with. And so, you know, I was transparent with what you know, when I felt safe to be, you know, which was not all of them, but there were definitely somewhere, you know, and that was not so that my client had to own looking after my feelings, right? That was my concern with sharing, and I was really deliberate that I didn't want that to be the case. But, you know, just I think it was actually a point of connection. And most of my coachees, you know, I would say we went on to have even better connection, therefore outcome, therefore, you know, relationships. And so, yeah, so there was that. But I did also, you know, I think it contributed to a decision that I wanted to do coaching differently. And I think it meant that I wanted to work in ways that allowed me to share more of, you know, almost more what I do now, I think of more as mentoring. It's not really coaching. It's really sharing from this experience that I've had. And, you know, I'd never felt that was never appropriate particularly. But there was something that was very healing and powerful about making that shift after these experiences that I'd had. And, you know, I really get it. I really enjoy that blend of what I do. So a lot of our group coaching calls I have with my coaches, you know, there is there is a lot of mentoring, there's a lot of teaching, and there's coaching, right? So I love the freedom to be able to do that. And I think, you know, that's the evolution that I've been on. And there is something about owning now, you know, here's this experience I've had, here's this expertise I've developed, here's this knowledge that I have, and I'm going to own that, and I'm going to, you know, use that in different ways, which, you know, I was my next step.
Well, thank you for kind of being so honest and open about that, because it's, you know, it's an awful thing that you had to go through. Oh, you know, and like you say, you don't stop going through it, do you?
No. And I'm conscious, you know, like that it is an experience that hopefully not many people will have in the same way that I had it. But, you know, whether it's the loss of a parent, even as an adult, like that alone is a, you know, huge experience, and a, you know, a really deep grieving and a transition in some ways that we have as adults. And, and so I think it's fairly common in some ways, uncommon in others.
And it feels like, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, that you sort of then decided to build a business around you instead of you in a business. That doesn't make sense, but it kind of does. Like,
no, it absolutely does. It does. And, you know, my business now is all about my experience, right? And so I work with like quite a narrow subset of people, which is executive coaches who want to work with organizational clients, right? And that is, I have built this business based on my experience. So that's exactly what I've done. And I kind of love it. Like I've built a business, and I think as coaches we can all do this, but I've built a business that works for my life, and my dreams and my priorities. And, you know, I always talk about this, that I'm really unashamed about my three pillars of what this is all about. And that is purpose, right? I do it because I want to have an impact. I want to make life better for coaches growing businesses and organizations because there are better coaches in there with them, and, you know, the world, because I think if our organizations are better, then the world is going to be better for so many people, right? The ripple effect. So there's purpose, there's flexibility and lifestyle, right? I want a business that works for my life. I don't want to be working all the time. I want to be present for my daughter, and I want to be present for myself, and I want it to be very profitable, right? I don't hold back from wanting us to have profitable businesses that do more than just, you know, pay our costs or pay the bills. Like, I think we should, you know, if we want to, we should not feel ashamed of leaning into that driver at the same time. So, you know, that's why I've built my business, and it's what I'm encouraging coaches to build in their own businesses.
So it really makes me think of The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. Have you read it?
Do you know, you suggested that one of the things I should think about is, what is a book or resource you recommend? And I wrote The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks.
Yes, I love that.
Great book. Yeah.
It really feels like that, you know, like me and Robbie refer to it as zone of genius shit.
Yes.
It feels like real zone of genius shit.
Yeah.
And obviously one of his mantras is, I expand in abundance, success and love every day as I inspire those around me to do the same.
Yeah.
That's it, isn't it? Like, that's what you're doing.
I've been so inspired by that. And another thing that Gay Hendricks talks about in that book is this idea of upper limits, right? Yes. And these upper limit problems we have, which is that we all have this subconscious barrier that we put in our way if we're not really aware of it, that stops us. And I think a lot of coaches have this, right, which is things like, oh, I shouldn't make too much money from being a coach because I should do it because it's the right thing to do, or because I have this skill and I should just do it because of, you know, it's good for people. And we limit ourselves. And so being really mindful of where that's coming from is another thing that I take from that book, alongside working in that space where we're really, not just doing things we're good at, but things that we are both energized and brilliant and motivated and not drained by, with these zone of genius shit, as you said. I love it.
Yeah. Because he also talks, doesn't he, about the zone of excellence, and that it's really quite easy to get stuck in the zone of excellence, the stuff that you're really good at.
Yep. Yeah. And I think I can see that has played out in a number of roles in my life, and I think I'm getting to that zone of genius. I think it's a journey for all of us. But, I think I was in zone of genius when I was a lawyer. Zone of excellence when I was a lawyer. I was very good at it, but I didn't love it. And even to some degree, perhaps in, running and designing, leadership programs, I was very good at it. But would I say it was my zone of genius? Probably not. And coaching probably sits somewhere between excellence and genius for me. But this hybrid that I do now, that is, mentoring and coaching, feels like it was a meant to be kind of thing.
Yeah. Zone of genius shit.
I hope so. I feel like I'm getting to that point where I'm almost too old to have another reinvention. 5th, 6th career? No.
Never.
Hi everybody, Robbie here. I'm the creator of The Coach's Journey. If you like what you're hearing on this episode, the chances are you'll love An Introduction to the Coaching Business Flywheel. That's a free ebook available at thecoachesjourney.com. It's the most important piece of content I've ever created for coaches, boiling down everything I've learned from this show, from working with master coaches, and from my own experience into one simple model. The model not only tells you the only things you have to do to have a sustainable coaching business, but also shows you how they can form a virtuous circle that keeps your coaching business growing. It's all free, and you can find it at thecoachesjourney.com. And there's a link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
So, I've got loads of notes. So we went from we got to zone of genius because you were talking about how you got to what you're doing now, and that you've kind of created a business.
Yeah.
That works for you more and fits your life.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know, do you still coach non-coaches?
Good question. And the answer is not a lot anymore. So I run 2 businesses currently. So I've got the Corporate to Coach Accelerator, which is where I work with coaches. But I also have Lucent Global, and Lucent Global is my coaching agency, so my business. But I don't actively market it anymore. I have some repeat clients so that come to me, and my team of coaches do most of the delivery now. So they do most of the coaching. So, and I use this as an example of why I recommend for most coaches working with organizations, not just individuals, because some of these clients, I did the business development work once, right? And they are clients that I've worked with over years and over multiple coachees every year. And so that one injection of business development effort has had this very highly leveraged payoff, right? So whereas, with individuals, we have to invest that business development effort again and again and again. And I'm not saying you shouldn't work with individuals, but, you should, I can really see the value of making sure there's a both in there, because of for that reason. And I know I sort of took us off target there, but so my answer is I don't do a lot of one-on-one coaching anymore. I do some one-on-one coaching with members of the accelerator, but mostly I'm in there. I'm running group sessions, and I'm doing a lot of creation of curriculum and content and all of that. That's much more where I'm spending my time.
Yeah. So do you worry that not having your hand in that part will kind of affect I don't know, because I work with some coaches, but I
Yeah.
always feel like I also want to be in the real world.
Yeah.
Like you say, like coaches are amazing and they're lovely and they're interesting, easy people to be around, and
Yeah.
but I sort of feel I need to keep my saw sharp.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I can see both sides of it. I mean, I feel like I am still, because I'm working with coaches, I'm still doing I'm very connected to the reality of the coaching world, right? Being out there. And so I'm, always involved with my coaches in terms of how they're designing their programs, what's landing, what's not, pricing. I probably have infinitely more insight into those things than I ever did before because of the sheer volume of people and organizations that I talk to. I do. Do I worry about losing my edge? Not really. I think I'm getting more and more effective in what I do, because just like as a coach, you don't have to be the expert in the context of your coachee. I think the same thing applies here, right? So my job is to translate things, business concepts, to create structures that will help coaches to build their businesses, not to tell them how to coach.
Yeah.
That's how I'm thinking about it at the moment, but that might change, right? There's that might change, and in which case I will shift my approach. But for now, it's I feel like what the value that I'm bringing is coming from all of the experience I have in business and translating it into the context rather than the hands-on coaching. Yeah. Although, as you'll know, I still identify as a coach. Like I think the first part of our conversation shows how deeply I am connected to coaching, right? I still feel like coaching is a big part of my identity. So, yeah. Who knows?
So where do you, and I did mention this before we started recording, what are your thoughts on the whole coaches coaching coaches? And someone actually said to me, it's just a pyramid scheme. People aren't selling a product. Because that's the definition, isn't it? That there's not actually a product in the end. Now, obviously, I don't believe that, and I don't have a problem coaching coaches, but even Russell Kane, he's a comedian in the UK. I don't know. He
I've
just
never
did this.
Heard,
no, he's quite funny.
I'll look him up,
and he's quite clever. And even he did a little random Instagram video about coaches and I'm a life coach and I'm going to teach you how to be a life. He did a whole skit on it, and I was, I wouldn't have thought that was in his sort of sphere. So it just feels like a really pervasive narrative, but maybe I'm looking out for it.
Do you know what? I have never heard that criticism of coaches.
Really?
But now that you pointed out, I can kind of see it. It almost, the way you're talking about it, almost sounds a bit like multi-level marketing, right?
Yeah.
Which is, if you get in at the top, you're going to be fine. And then you train coaches to be coaches who train coaches, and no one actually does any coaching.
Yeah.
So I can see that. I don't have any concern that that's what I'm doing, right? I feel very confident that, I've got a very clear deliverable, which is I want my coaches to have flourishing businesses where they are making money and purpose and living a life that they want to live, right? So I feel really clear about that. But I would almost go to the other extreme, which is that I think a coach that doesn't have a coach or a supervisor is not doing their job.
Absolutely.
Right? I think as a coach, if you aren't having an experience of being coached fairly consistently, I think that is more of a problem than getting too much coaching.
Yeah.
Would be my take. Now, now I've always got a coach or two, but generally I almost differentiate it from pure coaching, and generally I have coaches with a particular focus.
Yeah.
And so, the question is it really coaching or is it really mentoring? And it probably is more mentoring. So I have a business coach who helps me, with my strategy. I've got a coach who's been helping me figure out how to do advertising, because that is not a skill set that I've ever had. So things like that. Like so I bring people in as and when I need a skill or an issue. So that, and I sort of think about myself in that category now, which is, maybe coaching is a misnomer actually for what I do. Maybe it's mentoring, maybe it's training, something like that.
Yeah, and like you said, you're absolutely happy and safe in the knowledge that this isn't a coaching scam.
But I can see how it can be.
Yeah, and it definitely is. There are definitely people, surely you must get it as well. Like on LinkedIn, get
100 calls booked a week.
Yeah, and all that.
Like that. No, thank you.
Facebook is even worse for it.
Is it?
So I think there's a couple of reasons why I bring that up. Like, it's quite, people who are building a new coaching business, perhaps struggling to get clients, whether private or organisational or whatever. And I think certainly that it can be really easy to slip into a place of lack.
Yeah.
And kind of going, oh my God, everybody's a coach. All I'm seeing on Facebook, LinkedIn is people trying to coach me to be a more successful coach.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt about it. Building a coaching business can be hard.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that maybe that's the differentiator, is that those people who fall into that, coaches, convincing vulnerable coaches that they need, this magical system, I think they are ignoring the fact that it's hard, right? They're trying to sell ease. Whereas I think, what I do, and I'm sure, your approach is, I'm not saying that this is going to be easy. What I'm saying is that we can build a path. There are tools that will work, but you have to do the work, right? There's and we have to get comfortable with the discomfort. There's a real depth that is required to do this successfully. And I think if you just want to buy a 10 steps to success coach that's going to, I think you're going to find it is disappointing, and it will prey on your fears rather than giving you a real pathway. Yeah. And I think that's why they have such a bad rap, right? Which is they're very predatory, So, and I do, now that we talk about it, I do have people come into my program who have invested in these things, and they tell me, I wish I'd met you, a year ago, or I've made this investment and it was terrible, and I feel awful about that. I feel awful that people have this experience because,
because.
But it's interesting. I'm doing some self-reflection as we talk. I really don't put myself in that category. I really see myself as a very different thing, but I can see that from the outside, it could look the same, right? Because I promise that, the outcome we're talking about may be similar.
But I think, and obviously this is why I asked you onto the podcast, I feel, and we'll kind of dig into your approaches and next. I think that's kind of a natural progression, but a lot of your systems and advice and kind of aligns with what Robbie's doing with, and not just Robbie, like all of us at the Coach's Journey, he has like the Coach's flywheel, and it's, it's a virtuous cycle that if you go through all those steps, I'm going to get tested now, and I won't remember it, and I'll get it wrong, and it'll sound really crap. So it's like connecting with people, and then sharing your work. Like, how do you tell them what you do, and then how do you do it, and then how do you tell them how they, pay you to do it, and then this is the worst description of it ever, and I did a whole podcast series with Robbie on it, but I just think it really aligns with the steps that you talk about. And when I did this podcast series with Robbie, we talked a lot about, why this isn't the same as those charlatans.
Got it.
Promising that you're going to make 6 figures in a month or whatever.
Yeah.
Yep. And I just think it pisses me off because they're there, so people will tar us with that brush.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we know that what we're doing is ethical and important.
And if we didn't do it ethically, it'd be a lot easier to sell. Let me tell you.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it?
If I was willing to make statements that I didn't believe to be true just to get people in the door, that would be, I would have people knocking down my door.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So I think a good judgment call is, are these people making promises of any sort, right? Are they suggesting very quick timeframes? And, are they giving numbers? Like if they're saying, you can make 10,000 a month within 3 months or 100,000 a month in 6 months, then like most reputable coaches won't say that because there are so many variables.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is the sector, or what is the industry that you work in? And so many things. Complexity, as you know.
Yeah, complexity, definitely. So this is a really good point to kind of jump into what it is you do. And I've definitely got a question. I'm going to try and get some free expertise. Because you talk about is it the 5 hours a week thing?
Yes.
So go on, I'll let you go. You can dive into that or whatever, whatever you want.
So the 5 hours a week thing is a goal that I have as one of our outcomes inside the Corporate to Coach Accelerator. And what it is saying that I want us to have a system in place where we can do our business development activities in a limited time frame, right? So 5 hours a week. So we get it done in that time. And there's a few things that we include in that, things like we include our outreach, our content writing, our engagement on LinkedIn, and our audience growth, right? So those core things. So that is what we're talking about. There's a lot of foundations we need to have in place in order to get there. Things like we need to have our pipeline really fleshed out. We need to know who's in our network. We need to be really clear on our messaging. We need to have a content strategy, so we need a lot of foundations, but that's where we're getting to. And I've been talking a lot about how we want a system, right? And we want a system not just for the system, right? So yes, the system works, but actually the existence of the system is almost more powerful than what the system is, because for coaches, we are generally, I'm making some massive stereotypes, generalizations, assumptions, right? We are people who are very other-oriented. We have high standards, right? We want to show up for our clients. We want to be authentic. We don't want to be pushy. So there's a lot of this that's going on. And what that translates to when it comes to business development marketing is a lot of emotional labor, right? We do a lot of unnecessary work. We do not let it be easy. And I'm always talking about how can we let it be easier? But it translates as things like We overthink every time we post something, right? We review, we revise, we edit it, we look at our photo, we go, oh no, can't post that. And so what should be a 10-minute task becomes a 3-hour task. We fall into perfectionism, right? So, if I'm writing this page on my website or I'm sending this message, I need to make sure that I write the perfect message, right? Or the perfect page on my website. And so, we get ourselves caught up in that. We overthink, we ruminate, we think about, what are they going to think about me when they see this? What is this person who I went to primary school going to think if I send them a message? Are they going to think I'm, and I interviewed someone on my podcast last week, Kate Merriweather, who's a fantastic LinkedIn expert. She says, what if they think I'm a salesy dickhead?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we all don't want, right? So the presence of the system and the reason for the constraints around things like 5 hours is to force us to tune out a lot of this mental chatter so that we have a system and we have to implement the system and we have guardrails around how long we let that take. Because I know many coaches, it takes up days of their week rather than hours.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, I want that to be time that you actually spend, having meetings and, preparing proposals and delivering on work and having a break, taking a Friday off if you want, whatever. I want you to be using that time better. So that's why the 5 hours and what it is.
Yeah. And I think there's also something really powerful about removing that decision fatigue, isn't it? Of like,
Exactly.
Am I going to post on LinkedIn or am I going to send some messages or, and I think as coaches, again, a sweeping generalization, we aren't all kind of stats driven. Obviously some people will be, but
we're humans, human first.
Yeah, human first. But I have found that I listened to one of your episodes on kind of on tracking.
Metrics.
Favorite. And I've found that just by having those there, and I've set targets and and then, even colour coding that. So if I've hit the target, it's in green and I can feel really
I
pleased.
love to do that. Great tip.
Yeah. That for me, even just having that tracking system has kind of taken out some of the decision fatigue, because it's like, okay, I said I was going to send 20 invitations this month.
Yeah.
So actually my first job is just to make sure that that's what I do. And I push back, like I'm a rebel, and I kind of push back on like anything that feels a bit schooly or a bit
like someone told you to do it.
Yeah, but you seem to do it really well, Ellie, because if you say it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to write that down. It's the sort of stuff I would push back on. But I do think the way you deliver it and the way you explain like the benefit of it seems to get me on board.
Oh, that is I love hearing that. And like the other reason why I think the data, like you're talking about, so tracking things like, well, actually you feel like you're doing a lot of marketing, but how many outreach messages have you actually sent, right? And what actually is your revenue and what actually is all of this? Because we can often get into this cycle where we're very self-critical as well, which is it's all terrible, business is bad, I'm bad at marketing. But if we look at the data, it might not actually support that. And so either it's going to tell us, no, calm down, calm your farm, you're doing great. Like revenues are up 20%, from last month or year on year or whatever it is. So maybe we give ourselves a pat on the back instead of, pouring crap all over ourselves, right? Maybe we can do that. And then the other thing it can do is say, okay, well, maybe if things aren't going how I want them to, if I've got this data, maybe I can look at it and see, well, what is the problem, right? Where is it coming from? Instead of going into a spiral. And like, I go there, like, I know what this is like. We're going to, I'm terrible. No one wants to work with me. I'm a terrible coach, or no one's ever going to find out about me. I'm never going to sustain a business. But then if I look at it and I go, oh, well, actually, I've only sent 5 messages out this week. Is that really enough to sustain a growth business? Maybe not. Or I might even say, well, of all these messages I sent out, I got a 50% response rate. That's not bad. But of all the people I was talking to, I only had a 5% conversion to having a conversation, right? And that could be higher. So maybe that's what I need to work on is what is my strategy to have more real conversations with people after engaging them. Right?
Yeah.
And so that opportunities can emerge, and I can start to ask questions about, real business targeted opportunities. So, it lets us triage and figure out what's really going on instead of, these mental gymnastics that we do and the hypothesizing and the catastrophizing.
Yeah, for sure. Because when the first month I did it and I'd set like a target of, monetary value of what I've proposed. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh God, is that realistic? Is that possible? And it happened really quickly and really easily.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think, if I wasn't tracking it, I don't think I'd have noticed that at all.
No.
Because it's your confirmation, it's not confirmation bias, but when you're in that kind of struggling with your business, things are feeling hard, you're so good at ignoring the fucking good stuff.
Absolutely. Our negativity bias is real, like to the tune of what is it, 6 to 1, right? We place 6 times more attention on the things that don't work, right? So the proposals that aren't taken, the people who don't reply, the meetings we feel go badly. And the data helps us not to be Pollyanna-ish or to be, overly focused, but just to be neutral.
Yeah.
And that's my goal. My goal is never, I want you to, love writing your metrics down and capturing them. No, I want you to feel neutral, because neutral is a really nice place to be in business. And then when the good stuff, then we celebrate it and we lean into that, but we are just balancing out that negativity bias.
Yeah, and I think as well, that thing about being neutral, Robbie and I have talked about it, and I talk about it with my clients that are coaches, that, holding things lightly.
Yeah. Yep.
Which can be hard to do if it's a big prospect.
Yeah.
But it's a lot easier to deal with in general as a way of living your life by holding these things lightly.
Yeah.
And not piling a load of meaning onto stuff.
Yeah.
And that also goes, and I know you talk about this quite a lot, it also goes to those the little LinkedIn messages that you might send. Uh-huh. It's like, just send it and stop thinking about what they might think. And I think you talked to this as well about, just having the templates there and ready to go.
Yeah.
And copying and pasting. Yep. And it's so much easier to hold that stuff lightly when it's copied and pasted. What's that about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I would say it's copy, paste, adapt.
Yes.
Personalized, send. But I think what makes that easy in both of those contexts, right, where you've got an opportunity where it feels like so much is riding on it, right? And so it's hard to hold lightly. And, when we're sending messages out, it feels like everything is important and we don't want to stuff it up. I think it helps to think of it a little bit as a numbers game, right? So if we are, having enough opportunities, we're continuing, even when we've got an opportunity on the horizon, we still do our outreach, we still do our audience growth, we still do that. It takes a lot of the weight out of any individual opportunity because there's more going on, right? There's always another meeting to have. There's a something else. And so we can hold it lightly. And similarly, when we're sending out 20 messages as opposed to one message, that one message isn't the one that matters. It's the act of doing it, the consistency, the showing up that really makes the difference. And so we can hold that one lightly because we hold the consistency more heavily, right? That's what we're weighting as opposed to the individual message.
Yeah. And that again kind of speaks to the whole having your 5-hour-a-week plan or whatever works for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm definitely still a work in progress.
Oh, aren't we all? I am too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think as someone who's quite often shunned systems, I now recognise that having that system in place removes my decision fatigue. Like, instead of thinking about what am I going to do, it's clear what I'm doing, so just do it. And then it is easier again, in turn, to hold it really lightly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So do you want to give us like a bit of a rundown on what kind of happens? Because you've got, is there 2 programs or just one?
So there's one primary program, and then I do have a standalone digital course that people can buy anytime, which is called the Corporate to Coach Blueprint. It's included in the accelerator as well, but it's like that one is a taster of how do you set up an executive coaching business, right? All of the basics, and it's got it's got I think 36 modules, a 55-page workbook, everything from how do you set up a visual brand in Canva? What does it mean to be on a coaching panel in an organization? What do you need to set up as a supplier in an organization? What if they ask you for a modern slavery policy? I've been asked for that a number of times. Through to what's involved in an engagement, right? What do you do? Who's your client? How does the client and the coachee relationship interact for you as a coach when they're different people? How to prioritize your professional development. All of that stuff is in that blueprint course. But really the main way I work with people is through the accelerator. And that is for executive coaches who want to work with corporate clients or more corporate clients. So I've got people who are about on the runway to starting their business and who want to really start on the right foot. So we're building all their foundations, their assets, and their strategy so that when they start, they'll be ready to go. But on the other end of the spectrum, I've got coaches who've been coaching for 15 to 20 years who are pivoting, right? Who maybe have relied on associate work and want to generate their own clients because it's more profitable and reliable. Or people who've been coaches in different areas. So they might have been change coaches or things like that, and they want to leverage that experience to do more leadership and executive coaching work. So those are the sorts of people. But, to summarize, and I could talk about, I love this program, so I could talk about it for hours, but at its core, what we're trying to do is a few key things. We want to figure out your system to predictably and consistently bring in new corporate clients. And we want to do it in a time-bounded way so you don't feel like marketing is taking over your life, basically. So we want to have those constraints to avoid that emotional toll that it can take if we're not managing it well. And so to do that, we have a significant amount of curriculum, right? So we have 3 self-paced courses so people can join at any time. I don't limit it because when people want this, they want it, right? They don't want to wait for a cohort. They can join anytime. But the curriculum is the blueprint. So you get the blueprint, the total overview. You then have the 90-day quick start course, which is my clients have started calling it the 90-day kick in the bum program.
Excellent.
And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's complimentary, but I'll take it.
We all need to kick up the bum, don't we?
Yeah. And that's about really figuring out the basics of your business. So we work on defining your ideal clients and not niching. So it's a slight difference to niching. It's about where do you have unfair advantages that you could market to, and who do you want to work with. Then we talk about defining your offers. What exactly is the work that you want to do, and making sure that it solves problems for your clients that you want to work with, that it is, going to pay, and that it is going to have the impact you want it to have. And then we do the really practical stuff. So we build your coach bio. We've got templates for that. You work on your LinkedIn profile. All of these things you submit to me and I give video feedback on. It's a really great process. We do LinkedIn, we do website. So you either reviewing your website or building it from scratch. We've got like a whole website guide down to what the pages should have on them. I want to make it super easy. So that's one piece of curriculum. And the next piece of curriculum is the business development framework. And that is, how do we build your pipeline? How do we assess and analyze what's in your network? Who your warm connections are? How do we prioritize it? Then we build your content strategy that supports that. And then we build your rhythm around your 5 hours a week to get that moving. So that's the curriculum. But the heart of the program is really group coaching. So every week we have 3 group coaching sessions, and you can choose which one works for your time zone. So there will be 1 or 2 that work for every time zone in the world. And these are a chance to, firstly, it's an accountability check-in, right? So we talk about, what are we celebrating? What have we learnt? And what are your priorities for the week ahead? And some people love to come every week. Some people come every month. Like, it just depends on what you need. But then those sessions are the opportunity to get any question you have answered, either just by me or by the group, because there's a huge amount of wisdom in this community, because these coaches are extraordinary, let me tell you. And they're amazing. So that's how we take what you're learning and we apply it to your business in those sessions. And then we've got like lots of other fun stuff, like all the coaching calls are put on a private podcast. So if you can't come, or if you see something that you're interested in the summary from the other calls, you can listen into them at any time. We've got a community as well. But that's at the core of the program.
Wow, sounds amazing and really all-encompassing.
It is. It's meant to be like, walk alongside us with the structure you need to take your business either from, 0 to flourishing, or to help you execute a pivot or a new strategy.
Yeah. So obviously we have both new coaches and established coaches, or coaches who pivot, all that kind of, listening to this. So what would be your kind of golden nugget of wisdom for a new coach and for a more experienced coach who might be struggling?
Oh, this is so hard because I just have too many to share. So
you can share more than one.
I know. So I think I would say my one thing, if there was one thing you were going to focus on for anybody that is going to make a difference, anyone who is struggling with bringing business in, it is that you should prioritize outreach above everything else. And I don't mean cold outreach. I don't do cold outreach. That's like my worst nightmare. I mean warm outreach. So talking to people that you know, that you've worked with, that are in your personal network, that you have engaged with on LinkedIn, right? Those people, right? People who have put their hand up in some way and said, yes, I want to talk to you. You can talk to me. We're in this in some way together, right? So I would say prioritizing outreach and building your outreach strategies very deliberately is the thing that will turn the dial more than, faffing about on your website, right? I think that needs to happen. Don't get me wrong. Websites are important, but we can do a lot of busy work that's not going to make a difference, whereas outreach is the thing that will make a difference. So that's my number one tip.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good tip. And it's interesting because when you were talking about what was on the course, you mentioned assessing and analysing your network.
Yes.
Which really, that is something you'll do before you decide who you're going to reach out to.
Yeah, exactly. That's so that you have got a really clear prioritised list of who you're going to reach out to in order.
Yeah.
So you can say, yep, that's who I'm, 1, 2, 3. Go work my way down my thousands of contacts.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, that is a bit of a tedious process. There's no doubt about it. Segmenting your network is not always fun, but it is one of the most powerful things you'll do.
Yeah. So just high level on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, give us a bit more info on that. Is that what you, I think it was you downloading your LinkedIn contacts?
Yeah, that's me.
And
that's
then
what
then kind of categorizing them.
Yeah. Yeah. So we teach. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say you go ahead.
Yeah. So what we teach is how you can get into the back end of LinkedIn and download all your data. But we need to capture our network in a couple of ways. We want to capture our LinkedIn network, but we also want to capture our people who sit outside of LinkedIn. And that includes, like our personal networks and, various other, work related networks. So we want to capture it. We want to put it into a usable format. So we've got like a template spreadsheet. And then we need to be categorizing every line, every individual in terms of the sector or industry that they're in, particularly relative to our ideal client sets. And we need to be giving them like a warmth categorization, right? How warm are they? Because we want to be able to sort of, prioritize the data in different ways, because sometimes we want to filter by our ideal clients and sometimes we want to filter by warmth. And so we do that in various ways. And so then we sort of have at the end this list of leads really that we're going to then reach out to.
Yeah. And I found it really useful because if you kind of go onto LinkedIn and start searching or like thinking about who should I send a message to, you end up seeing the annoying adverts of pushy coaching coaches.
Yeah.
Seeing what someone you went to school with did and then doing a bit of stalking or, whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas I now know I go to my spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought I could colour code them. Obviously, I like colour coding.
Yes, I like it.
And just message whoever's next on the list.
Yeah. Perfect. That's exactly what you should do. The other thing I would say, and this is sort of just a bit of a tangent, is we do need to curate our feed on LinkedIn. And what you'll find, like most coaches, is we're really supportive of other coaches. So what we see is coaches.
Yeah.
Right. So we end up in an ecosystem, a bit of an echo chamber actually of coaches. And so we need to be very deliberate that we are engaging with our ideal clients more than we are engaging with other coaches.
Yeah.
Which means finding those people, commenting on their posts, liking their content of the people that you want to see. And that works because if you are liking and engaging with them, they're going to see you, right? So that's what we want. We want to engage with the people who we want to see our content. Because if we're just liking all of our coach friends' content all the time, which is really nice, it's very nice, but it just means the only people who are going to see us are other coaches. And that, really does defeat the purpose a little bit. So we've been talking about that in the accelerator this week, actually, which is a bit of a tough one because we've got a very supportive community and we all want to like each other's content, but it can get to a point where no one else is seeing it. So we have to be mindful of that.
Yeah. And I also think, like, when you said about curating it, I was doing big nodding. Because, people will often say, oh, I hate going to LinkedIn because I see X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, stop seeing it. You don't have to see it.
Yes.
Yes. Hide that person, hide
Absolutely.
the annoying person, or, hide your mum's sister's dog's cousin or whatever.
Or for me, it's like hide the people that do trigger that little bit of insecurity. Absolutely. Or that make me feel like I'm on there. I'm going, oh, I don't know if I'm good enough or, this, like, I don't need that. I don't need that in my life. I'm going to hide it. And like, yes, probably I should do a bit more therapy so that I can get over it. But for now, I'm just not going to put myself in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it a healthy kind of prick of Oh, I'd quite
Yeah.
like that in my
Yeah.
business. Or
Yeah.
is it just a really unhealthy kind of makes you feel shitty?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Get rid,
Yeah.
unfollow, hide, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as coaches we do experience that because there is a sense that people who are posting beautifully on LinkedIn, we assume that their businesses are going beautifully, right? And that they must be so much more successful than us. And that's not true, right? The truth is some of the most successful coaches are the most, down and dirty posters on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
And, they're posting the ugly selfies, not the polished content. They're showing up, very vulnerably. And some of the people you assume are the most successful are not. They've just got a really good LinkedIn consultant working for them.
That's true.
Right. And which is fine, right? That's their strategy, but don't make assumptions based on what you see, and certainly don't give yourself, don't be self-critical based on what you see of other people's highlights reel.
Yeah. And interestingly, Ellie and I were talking before we press the record button, that for both of us, when we post bad selfies of ourselves on LinkedIn, they get the most engagement.
Absolutely. The most, of all of them. And I recommend that to the people in the accelerator a lot. I don't say post the, the ugliest selfie of yourself you can find. But what I do say is that the more you are sharing your face, people are connecting with you much more than if you are not. And the difference then is between like a professional photo and a real photo. I mean, they're all real photos, but the connection is going to be even stronger because people feel like they're seeing the real you, not like the veneer.
Yeah.
And that is very powerful. Even in high level sales, like people want to see you, who you are. And that's the thing that's going to differentiate us from the robots, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm not against the robots, by the way. I use AI significantly.
Oh gosh, we've not even talked about that, Ellie.
I know. So we do, and honestly, it's at the point where I can't even keep up with all of the tools and the approaches. And so we're really inside the accelerator. It's a collaboration. Everyone is sharing, all the tools they're using, what they're finding is working, how they're, customizing their GPTs, what they're using it for. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Mm.
Maybe we'll have to do another interview about that.
Yeah, I know. Well, maybe I'm not the expert. Maybe I'll send some of my more expert community members. They're extraordinary.
Yeah, I don't think anyone can be an expert at the minute, can they?
No.
Because it moves so fast. Yeah, like you say, we're not robots, and that is our best selling point, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
How, like, just something came up for me because I quite often struggle showing up on LinkedIn because I always feel that I'm not corporate enough and I'm not polished enough.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you think that works? A messy selfie, like you said, you posted one where you had wet hair.
Yeah.
How does that work with a corporate kind of idea?
Good question. So bearing in mind that I'm marketing to individuals, particularly coaches, right? They're my people, and
of course.
They connect with me in a different way, which is that they want to know that I have had the same experiences that they're having. And that's what I want to get across, right? Is that I am real. I am going, I am in this world of business building just like you, highs and lows. I want to have a life. I want to profit, and I want to have an impact, right? So I think I am willing to be more authentic probably in that space. And I think with corporate clients, it would be we're still talking to people, right?
Yeah.
We're still talking to people, and people connect with people. But I think there is probably a different layer of how close to, how much I would show. And it's not that I would be fake in any way. I just might show a different side of myself, right? So I might be more inclined to show myself in terms of like, what do I care about outside of work, right? So my dog, or hiking, or, being in nature, and things where there is more of a nexus with the experience of the person I'm talking to. Whereas the nexus of me, the context in which I put the wet hair, pretty rough photo was I wanted to share my very imperfect story of becoming a coach and then going into the business that I do now. And so that really, that made sense, is that if I'm talking about sharing this warts and all story, I'm going to share a warts and all photo because it joins the dots. So if I'm talking to an organizational client, generally, not to a specific client, I might be talking about, the importance of balance, right? Of flexibility, of, how our leaders are getting burnt out. And I might be telling a story about me. And so the photo I choose might illustrate what that either looked like at the time or looks like on the way out of it, right? And the things that have helped me to get through that. And so, I might just do it slightly differently.
Yes, there's ways to still be authentic.
Yeah.
Without being
wet hair.
Yeah. Or mine was a really sweaty red face because I'd been for a run. But it was about recommitting.
Yes, I actually think that's perfect for a corporate client.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you think about the buyer of coaching service, right? They're out there. They're having habits.
Yeah.
They want health. They want resets. They want that for themselves, and they also see how that applies for their leaders. So, I think that's great. Yeah.
And I think you make a really good point, and that even if you are wanting to appeal to big organizations, you are still selling to people because someone has to agree to it, or someone has to go, oh, that'd be good. Exactly. And then somebody then has to convince, whoever's got the purse strings that would be good.
Yeah. Yeah. And what we're doing on LinkedIn is not convincing people to buy our services. We're convincing them that, we should, that we're getting them to think about something. We're getting them to want to have a chat, right? Just enough, an idea where they go, oh yeah, she gets it. She gets it. She gets me. That's interesting, right? They're the things we want. We're not going to say, oh, you need a lengthy leadership development program because this and this. And, sometimes we will put more thought leadership content up there about that sort of thing. And some people love that. But, that's not the thing that will convince people. It's the conversations they have with you, the credibility, the assets you have, all of that is what will get that over the line. So the connection on LinkedIn is what we're going to do.
Yeah. Which is the top of the flywheel, and I've forgotten what the rest of the flywheel is, so I'm going to be in trouble.
Put a link to it in the show notes.
Oh, it's always in the show notes, yeah. Perfect. So I'm just conscious of time, and I'm so gutted. I could sit here all day. Thank you so much, Ellie.
Oh, you're most welcome. It has been a delight. I have, I've really enjoyed it, Ruth.
Good. Well, so most importantly, where can people hear about you, find out more about you?
Absolutely. So if you want to connect with me, come on over to LinkedIn, just at Ellie Scarf. You can find me on LinkedIn. And then my website is elliescarf.com, where you can read all about the Corporate to Coach Accelerator. And I've got a whole lot of free resources on the front page. So I've got a number of masterclasses, free masterclasses. I really overteach in my free masterclasses, so you'll get a lot of value. and oh my God, I nearly forgot. I have a podcast called The Business of Executive Coaching, which is a great way to sort of learn a bit more about, what I do. And it's all based on very practical tips. So every episode I aim to have something you can take away and do and is helpful.
Yeah, and I can attest to that, because that's how I found you, was through the podcast. I don't know how I came across the podcast. I think I might have just searched on Spotify for a certain for a certain thing. Maybe it was LinkedIn or I think
LinkedIn for coaches or something like that. Maybe.
But it's been super useful to me, and so I can absolutely recommend that.
Wonderful.
So, one last little gem of wisdom, or do you listen to Tim Ferriss? He does like, what would you put on a billboard?
Oh, what would I put on a billboard? Okay. I think the one tip or thing for a business owner in the executive coaching space that I would want you to take away from this is remember that you are not just a coach, you are also a business owner. And that the identity work that we do as coaches is really important when we transition into running our own businesses, or if we're finding that something isn't working. This is not going to fit on a billboard.
No, I might be able to surmise it. Yeah, keep going.
But if we feel like something is missing, then it might be that we haven't integrated that piece of our identity, which is I'm a coach, but I'm also a business owner.
There you go. You just said it. That's what can go on the billboard.
Perfect. Yeah, it turns out I'm a bit verbose for billboards.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you're a coach. You're not just a coach, you're a business owner.
Yeah.
And I was having a conversation with a coach, and I said, who was also doing another business. And I said, you're running 2 businesses. And she said, what? I was like, you're running 2 businesses? Oh, I'd never thought of that.
Yeah.
It's like...
Yeah, that's...
And then how do you expect it to be successful if you don't even kind of think of it as a business?
Yeah. And I think it's quite liberating when we make that decision, because it lets us lean into things that we might not otherwise, things like, metrics. Well, if I'm a business owner, then I better do some sales, because no business gets by without selling. And I'm shocked how many coaches still say to me, oh, I don't really want to do any sales. I'm like, so you don't want any clients? and I think maybe subconsciously there is a bit of a fear, right? There's a fear of getting clients, just as like there's a fear of not getting clients.
Yeah.
Because, the fear is what if I can't do it? What if I'm not as good as I think I am? That's the fear. And so therefore we put all these barriers in the way, so we can't ever find that out.
Yeah.
So it's, that's deep. That's probably another upper limit problem.
The upper limit. Wow.
Is what do we put in our own way to stop ourselves from achieving what we might?
I worked out that I was actually making myself physically ill.
Yeah.
To stop myself achieving.
Yes. Yeah.
And even to the point now, since having that realisation, like, my partner would say, are you doing this again? I'd say to him, oh, I think I've got a headache, or, I feel a bit sick. And he'd say, are you doing this again? And then I'd be able to go, oh my God, I am. And then, miraculously, I don't feel sick anymore. I don't have a headache. And so,
that's extraordinary.
Yeah. And I couldn't believe it at first. And then I'd started Googling it, and like, the brain is so powerful, what it can do to you.
Yeah, it is. But I think, that awareness that sometimes these things that we perceive to be external factors are things that we are subconsciously creating to stop ourselves once we hit our limit of where we believe we should be able to succeed to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that's it. That's where we shall leave the podcast.
That's another billboard.
Yeah, stop upper limiting. Yeah. But also a good billboard is to kind of circle back to find out what is your zone of genius shit. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm pretty sure for most of the people I work with, it is coaching, but it's having permission to be able to do that, and giving yourself permission to do the work that will allow you to be in that genius zone.
Yeah, for sure.
More.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ellie. It has been wonderful, and I could have gone on and on, so maybe we'll have to do it episode 2 at some point.
Anytime. Thanks very much, Ruth.
Thanks, Ellie.
Hey everybody, Robbie here, creator of The Coach's Journey, and just a few quick things to share with you before you go on to the rest of your day. If you love this episode, I want to tell you about 2 other things that I think you'll love. The first is my free ebook, An Introduction to the Coaching Business Flywheel, which you can get at thecoachesjourney.com. It's my attempt to boil down everything I've learned from my years supporting, coaching, and interviewing coaches about their businesses into one simple model containing the fundamentals of any sustainable coaching business. These are the only things you have to do to have a sustainable coaching business, and they're the things that if you don't do them, you can't have a sustainable coaching business. You can get it for free at thecoachesjourney.com. Secondly, the Coach's Journey community. It's my flexible, affordable group coaching program for coaches. You pay between £20 and £100 a month and get access to a certain number of group coaching calls a year, some one-to-one time with me if you're a full member, and various other benefits. And of course, you get the chance to be connected to other amazing coaches on their own journeys. You can join at thecoachesjourney.com/community. Thanks so much to everyone who's supported the Coach's Journey over the years, but in particular, thank you to Alex O'Neill, Alex Whitten, Alan Bedding, David Norris, Jessica Jem, Lucy Braun, Michael Chugman, and Nicola Doyle for your ongoing support. Thank you too for listening, and we hope to have you back with us on the Coach's Journey podcast sometime soon.